Can you tell us how much your life has changed after the tragedy that has happened? Because
you mean the invasion of Ukraine?
I mean the war in Ukraine.
The invasion,
because
the war. We call it a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, with the war, invasion.
Yeah.
All the words you prefer are right.
Yes, well, I think obviously there was months and weeks of anticipation as the news here was full of reports of the build-up of Russian forces around the border. So the news was constantly in an anticipation of what would happen. I felt very depressed and saddened. I don't think I've ever, of course, in our lifetime, I've read about other horror stories, whether in the invasion of Iraq, which I think was wrong, and the civil war in Syria. I mean, many things in my lifetime that have been disturbing. For some reason, maybe because of my friendships with many Russian people, and indeed some Ukrainian people, that I felt very numb with the kind of depression or anxiety about what was happening. I think it's hard to have the right words. I mean, I think I'm like anyone else who reads the news, and you read about these executions and bomb attacks perpetrated on the Ukrainian people by the Russian military, and it's profoundly upsetting. And for me, war is the great obscenity. It's an obscene thing, war, and I'm kind of bewildered that after a century of 2 world wars and other terrible wars, whether it's Vietnam or the wars in the Middle East and the wars against ISIS, all over the world there have been, and still they're sending tanks into countries in Europe, and they're sending missiles into railway stations. This is still happening. Is this the best of the human race? Is this where we are? I mean, I'm what to say? It's I mean, it was important for me to contact the friends I have in Russia when this happened, because I think one reaches for your own friendships and the people with whom you believe you have some bond. And all my friends were very distressed, upset, in tears, shocked. They couldn't believe it. And of course we hear how the Russian media is obviously managed aggressively, so that people we're reading different news, obviously.
Some of us, at least. I've discussed what is happening with a lot of my friends, people of culture, artists, writers from Russia, and several people have reminded me of the words of prominent German philosopher Theodor Adorno, who said after the Second World War that after Auschwitz, poetry is impossible, and that was the feeling that many Russians felt after Bucha. How do you think the war is going to affect art, and what Russian art could look like after such a terrible war?
I suppose the first thing is there's this feeling of numbness, because the kind of foundation of meaning that we give our lives, we enjoy art, we read books, we go to the theatre, whatever it is, all those things that the settled lives, like now in London, I'm in a play, people come to that, all that stuff is thrown up, it's questioned. All the things we take for granted it makes you, what do we value? What is when you read, what is the place of art when you have this sort of obscenity being perpetrated? I think the human mind goes, well, it's so shocking that you go, well, because perhaps if one has felt art has a value to enlighten the human soul and to reflect ourselves, show us ourselves and the catharsis of the theatre or the encounter with a great piece of literature. Maybe I've naively have had the view that gives us some kind of enlightenment or some kind of sense of purpose, or gives us an acceptance of our mortality and an appreciation of some kind of ethical centre. But when this sort of thing happens, like the Ukraine, maybe because it's so close or so shocking, then I can understand that quote about, is it Adorno you said?
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that we go, well, where does poetry have any meaning now?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're numbed, one is numbed. That's the word that keeps coming to me, a kind of numbness. But then, one sees a clip of a young Ukrainian female cellist or violinist playing music, and I think there is this place where we need to hear something or encounter something that is an expression that kind of takes us beyond and obviously I'm thinking of concerts held, I think, in Sarajevo at the time of the bombing, and I think particularly music is something people go to kind of come to terms with the horror. But I don't have any. I think for the moment people are numb,
mm-hmm.
and you can either choose to let this news affect you, or you can carry on. I mean,
and many people do.
Yeah, I feel I've become some kind of addict. I'm reaching for my phone all the time to see what is happening. Sometimes I think I should just put my phone away. But I guess I have an impulse to be connected or to follow what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
But
is that happening to you because you are so connected with Russian culture? Because you speak some Russian, you've been to Russia many times, and you played in Evgeny Onegin. Yeah, is it the reason for your interest, or it has affected all people in Britain? What's your estimate? How important is that tragedy for people in Western Europe, for Western culture, for British culture?
Over the past few years, the general tone of the media has been tilted towards a great suspicion of Putin. And we've had the poisonings here in Salisbury. So there is a reluctance or an antipathy towards the Russian state here. I would generally, if you follow the news here, we've had, you would feel, and so that's up until now that's frustrated me, because I've worked in Russia on films. I have Russian friends who their friendship is valuable to me, and I've had very happy experiences there. And of course, and I know other people from this country who have had very positive encounters and experiences with Russian people. And of course, in the end, if you have a bond with someone, in the end, it's your human connection. Mm-hmm. The nationality is of interest, but what is the best thing about any friendship? It's a human connection. So when I'm with a Russian friend, I'm not thinking, oh, this is my Russian friend. I'm just thinking, this is my friend.
Yeah.
I think the great sadness is that the potential for Look, there are people better placed than me to comment on Russia, but I've always thought that, maybe naively, that despite the authoritarian regime, there is some fluid movement towards some kind of openness. And that one sees that the Putin regime has clamped down harder and harder on any kind of expression, so that what we are privileged to have here, as you know, is freedom of expression. I can protest against Boris Johnson's government and I won't be arrested. And we take that for granted. And I suppose it's become more. It's a sad thing to see that this current regime just become this oppressive weight on, as I see it. And this war, I think, has made that even more. I mean, I think we have to wait a long time before is there going to be any shift in Russia that will allow. Here you are, independent journalist. We both know people who have spoken out and have written, and they've had to leave the country. Mm-hmm. That's. I don't see that. You must not know when you can go back. No, you don't.
I don't.
No. And here we are. We were bonding over this thing called a civilized exchange of views, but the views that your independence is neutered in Russia. That for me is a deeply depressing. Deeply depressing. That I think an opposition. The health of a country is the health of its opposition. I think an opposition is important in the best work. The nations that are the healthiest in their infrastructure, I think, they need to have a healthy opposition that can speak. And once the opposition is killed off, then it's all about power and the strength of power and the oppression, and that for me is a going backwards. I know I've heard these arguments about Russia's always had a Tsar and the power of we need this. You don't understand, Rafe, how Russia works. I've had this said to me many times. We need our Tsar, we need our strong man. This is how we are.
Have you heard that from Russians?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yeah, this is how Russia always. We need man the last.
Yeah, there are definitely Russians who believe that. Mm-hmm. There are definitely Europeans who believe that that's Russia's destiny, that Russia is doomed to be a dictatorship. And just speaking about those independent artists or journalists or filmmakers who have left Russia, I cannot mention. I should mention your movie White Crow, about Nureyev, who has immigrated from the Soviet Union, and it's like, doesn't it look like history repeating itself again and again?
Yeah, it does.
Were you expecting when you were making this movie that several of your friends are going to repeat Nureyev's fate?
No, I didn't see that. I could see that the current administration was oppressive. And certainly, although we looked for funding in Russia, we didn't have funding for the film. We had some help with a premiere, but I think I could feel that this gay ballet dancer who was leaving Russia was not. It didn't tick the boxes of what. Mm-hmm. I mean, but I didn't feel that. We weren't stopped making it. We shot some scenes in St. Petersburg, and it was fine. I mean, we dealt with the complications.
But only several scenes. You were not to make the full movie in Russia, right?
No, we made most of it in Serbia. Gabby, I think, felt well, it's another story, but I think in the end, I think she made the right decision that it was too complicated for lots of reasons.
Your producer, Gabitana.
Yeah, too complicated to shoot in Russia, too difficult for all kinds of reasons. And we had made Coriolanus in Serbia very in terms of production, very successfully in terms of efficiency of production, and so I think Gabby's decision was right. But it helped that there was no visa necessity between Serbia and Russia, so Russian actors could come in to Serbia, so it was a good solution. But no, yes, so going back to your question, this is, you see, I think what spoke to me about The White Crow was not that I wanted to make a film about ballet. I wanted to make a film about an artist, and a difficult artist, not some saint. He was, a difficult man, rude and difficult, but brilliant. But had this urge that he saw an open society when he went to France. He saw a life and knew he had to have it. And I always found that very moving. And it more was, yes, it was specifically about leaving the Soviet Union, but for me, symbolically, it was about the need of the artist to be free, to express. And, to break away. And the courage to claim who you are, even if it means you leave behind your homeland.
What do you think can happen to the next generation of Russian artists who are now leaving Russia behind, at the same time being afraid that they won't be welcome in the West? Because
I think that's a really important question, because I think, of course, what happens when you have this sort of situation is that there's a collective righteous anger. And righteous anger is very dangerous because it quickly becomes stupid.
Yesterday I was walking not far from here in London and saw a huge banner, "All Russians responsible."
That's shocking to me. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Righteous anger makes people a bit stupid because they go, wrong, everyone wrong, all Russians bad. And that's where we need to be smart about how we go into the future, because to condemn all Russians unthinkingly seems dumb to me. I think we need to be very clear that we condemn the Putin administration. I think this is an evil war. I mean, when I see the bodies in Bucha and those missiles going into the railway station, I can't see, for all the arguments about Ukrainians are our brethren and Kiev is the old centre of old Rus, and I don't understand that these bombs and killing it just seems obscene and wrong. So of course there's a feeling of anger, but collective accusation, general accusations are really unhelpful. And so I have respect for the Russians who have spoken out and have have had to leave their homeland, leave their livelihoods, find another life. And I think it's important we acknowledge, we need to have a dialogue. We need to keep these connections going, because that is the future. Somewhere it's the future for Russia. I don't know. I think some of the leaders have said, haven't they? I mean, I think Boris Johnson, who I have many doubts about, but I think he has said this is a war against Putin's regime, not against the Russian people.
Yeah, I remember him addressing Russian people in Russian. And like in Russian, he said that I do not believe that this war is your decision.
Yeah, it's not, though, but we have to go through phases. We go through phases of collective anger where, of course, a human response is I don't want to read Dostoevsky anymore, which is sort of, it's how we, it's our emotions working. It's not our brains. But I think it will. I mean, hopefully there has to be a peace at some point. I just hope the right people in positions of influence and power, whether in the news or in politics, are people with some kind of foresight and wisdom that they need to know that there's a generation to come. But I think it means we have to be strong. I mean, the so-called liberal democracies, which have come together in a good way, I think, in condemning. We can't be complacent. We have to really say, well, what this is again, this makes us go, what do we value? We have to be very clear about the things that, you know, we move through our life. I move through this life. I have a good life in London. I work, but something like this makes you go, well, we need to be strong about keeping what we have, and it needs a kind of commitment. We need the right leaders and people to. We desperately need really smart leaders and people to. You know, populist politics is. We need the right people in politics or leaders, or you know, where are they? I mean, I think. We have here the need for the votes and the massaging of. I mean, it's. Yeah, it's this thing about nationalists, the massaging of nationalist sentiment, which again, like righteous anger, it's a simplifier. Mm-hmm. It simplifies, and society is complicated, and it shifts and it moves, and I think politicians massage the simpler emotions, and people. And that's like candy to people. They go, oh yes, they find something to dislike or something, and that's the cheapening of our political discourse, which happens here. And so I don't. That's where I suppose, in my naive way, the best art is a provocation to think, and I do think that. Out there, I believe there are young writers and musicians and actors and directors and people who are keeping some kind of intelligent discourse alive through artistic expression, intelligent artistic expression that recognizes the complication of being human. And I think that's hard for people because people don't like. Human beings are paradoxical and ambivalent and contradictory, and politicians like to have simple, and I think we need the people who can speak for society need to be able to say, but there isn't an easy answer. We can't just condemn all Russians. That's because there are Russians like yourself who are claiming an independent voice, and people who are standing up and saying this war is wrong, and we need the blanket judgment is seems always unhelpful, but often it's useful for politicians.
You seem to be a big expert in evil. And in nationalism as well, because you played several most symbolic villains in the history of the cinema, and especially like your character in the Schindler's List. While preparing for that role, you definitely read a lot about Nazi regime, about those. About that period of German history. Do you think that actually any human being is internally ready to or capable to commit any kind of terrible crime, and internally that's more or less in a part of human nature, and and under several circumstances anyone can become a national or affected by mass nationalism and follow that trend.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I remember researching the background to that character, Armand Goeth, and the rise of National Socialism and the huge appeal, popular appeal of this brand of fascism that Hitler was promoting, and terrible, disgusting anti-Semitism. And yes, he managed to, that's the most overt example, I think, of what I was clumsily trying to express was, the careful management of a brand which says here, it says to the people, you are great, you are wonderful, this is the people who are trying to destroy you. You see it from the Putin regime, if you speak out, you're a traitor. Mm-hmm. It is the simplifying of any discourse, so that if you don't agree with me, you're a traitor to the country. And Hitler did a version of the same thing. And I think a lot of good people who are not necessarily inherently violent or destructive. People want to be in tribes, don't they? They feel safe with the other people who think the same. And so yes, I think a lot of people we can all be manipulated. And even when we don't think we are, I think there's a danger that we can all.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel?
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, just. Do you feel that there is a threat of some nationalism on rise in Britain, in Europe? I remember.
I don't really know, except that I think that the nationalistic card was played heavily by. I was against the Brexit, but I still am. I thought that whatever the many faults of the EU, I thought that the sense of a collective of functioning democracies, open democracies with a shared economic interest and a shared belief in some kind of transparent transitioning of power and openness, I thought that was I felt emotionally, and I still do. And this government massaged popular nationalistic sentiment. Mm-hmm. I feel, and there'll be people who disagree with me, I felt they massaged exactly that sense of we don't want to be part of Europe, and Boris Johnson led the way with a very vigorous campaign to dismiss the EU.
Yeah,
and now they're regretting it because they can't, many complicated custom laws, they can't, over the border concerns they have with refugees, they can't cooperate with the French because the French have no interest, we have no common EU laws. Ireland is a problem, and I'm not an economic expert, but I feel it emotionally that to be part of Europe was a good thing. And it seems to me a backward step to massage nationalistic sentiment for separation. And I kind of despise nationalism. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we all have. I mean, I can cheer for the English football team, maybe. I mean, I'm not that interested in football, but mm-hmm. But I think and I see it in Russia too, and that's another thing that you talk about Russian culture, and for me, the great artists transcend their nationality because they say something about mm-hmm. humanity. Mm-hmm. So I think what probably is challenging people is when culture is a country's so-called culture is made part of the brand of the nation, Whereas, you know, Tchaikovsky's part of the brand of Russia. Well, I would say Tchaikovsky isn't. Tchaikovsky is a spirit that is communicates.
Or a different brand.
Well, he's just the spirit in his music is there for anyone to receive. It doesn't need the guidance of the Russian state to tell us how great. You know, it's like saying, you know, Shakespeare is ours. Well, Shakespeare's bigger than anything English. You know, Shakespeare is like a philosopher. And it's like the Greeks saying, you know, Socrates is ours.
By the way, like many Russians speaking about Russian identity and Russian unique national historical path. At the same time, a lot of Russians usually for many years were complaining about West being prejudiced against Russia, and every time when Russian characters are depicted in the movies, for example, they are the perfect villains, all the serial murderers, all the bad guys, and like.
I agree. That's terrible. That is a terrible cheapening of stupid I mean, just offensive.
Really?
Well, I think yes. I mean, we've seen so many films where the Russian gangster, the villain, you know, it's a reduction of. It's. I mean, there are Russian gangsters. There are English gangsters. You know, we have our English cop crime films. You know, of course, we have a. You know, if we talk about how culture takes types, identifiable types, and.
Do you think that was some kind of contribution of that long time tradition to make that gap between Russia today and the West today more broad and more deep?
What are you saying, that the portrayal, the simplified portrayal of Russian characters in movies
and growing
helps to promote
of the prejudice against Russian and the Russian prejudice against the West? That if the West is portraying us as a cruel, dumb villains, probably they hate us. That's how many Russians think, and even you know, I've seen many Russians offended by Kingsman because they found that Rasputin and Lenin and Nikolai, like it's all wrong. It's not the way how it was in.
I thought they might be
historically.
Yeah. I had lots of conversations with the director about that.
And what was your position?
Well, I said I think a lot of Russians would find this very oversimplified. He sort of said, well, I think it's entertaining. Yes, I think that doesn't help. I agree. It doesn't help to have... I mean, I think there are certain kind of films which will always take a type, and I'm sure there are Indian films where the British are all reduced to sneering colonial officers. And certainly there'll be, you know, Irish films where and if you're of the country, you resent the character who is of your country being reduced into a kind of, you know, a symbol, a simplistic, what's the word I want? Cliche. Yeah. I think probably if we're talking about the portrayals of Russians in films in the West, I think you're right. Generally, there's been a crudeness and a lack of real investigation or roundedness. I agree. I think that's. But I think it's often it's producers and directors going, here's a good story, there's this character, and there's the Russian gangster, and then there's the Irish heroine, and then they're not really thinking beyond what makes their movie work. So it's not a collective national or cultural antipathy. it's people just in their own box going, oh yeah, we'll have the bad guy, he comes from Albania, and then there's the Brazilian gangster who so I think they're just thinking greedily about their own film. They're not really thinking about the cultural echo.
Okay, I don't know if you know that, or if you have ever seen that, but one of your characters is usually compared to President Putin, especially on Russian social media. I'm speaking about Lord Voldemort, and like there are lots of pictures with Voldemort, with Putin's face, and so on and so forth. What do you think about that comparison? And can you imagine yourself playing Putin, for example?
Well, I don't think
I
haven't. I can't at the moment. No, I can't. Character, because he's just only evil. He hasn't got. I mean, like any men who've reached great power, authoritarian power, their backstories are very interesting. How they came to be who they are, and what they went through when they were young, and the things that shaped them and formed them, and that they have a human story. And Putin has a story about his upbringing in St. Petersburg and his posting in East Germany, and so something's made him. But Voldemort is just a sort of spirit. I mean, he has a backstory, I know, but it's not. I don't know quite what to answer to your question.
Yeah, but actually, that means that as a character, Putin is, as he's more complicated than Voldemort. Probably that's a big challenge for
I think I think what's interesting, like at the moment on stage, I'm playing a very divisive figure, a real person, no longer dead now, but he was the man who shaped New York. He was the big master builder, planner of New York, called Robert Moses, and he amassed a lot of power to build roads and parks, and he's very divisive. His legacy is very divisive because he took people out of their communities and moved them in order to build roads, and he wouldn't listen, he wouldn't tolerate any disagreement. He started off as a visionary. So anyway, if you play that kind of man, you have to get inside their head, and you have to kind of find the worldview that they have. That's your job. Mm-hmm. And you have to sort of go to the place where you see it from their point of view. I think that's often that's a challenge. That's part of what you. And I did that. I had to do that for Schindler's List. It was the place in someone's head where they think that what they're doing is right.
Mm-hmm. There was some kind of debate between several Russian people of culture recently, because some people were saying that now we feel ashamed of being Russians, and other figures, especially from the conservative wing, from the power, responded that okay, if you feel ashamed that you are Russian, forget about it. That means that you are not Russian. That Russians cannot feel ashamed of being themselves. Do you understand? Can you feel that emotion? Have you ever been, like, for example, ashamed of being British because of something that was happening, or what was made on your behalf by the government, or what can you?
I think it's important to confront.
That sentiment.
I think it's important to confront the things that your country has done wrong. I mean, British history is full of terrible acts of violence and oppression against, say, in the British Empire, indigenous peoples in Africa and in India, and we were brought up on the myth of the British Empire. But now, and there is a movement, and it's on the whole healthy, that we look at the transgressions committed by the British And certainly I grew up with, my mother was very clear to me that I grew up with lots of history books that said we won this battle, we did Battle of Waterloo, Battle of... And then we moved to Ireland, and my mother said, you have to understand that the history of the British in Ireland is terrible, that the oppression of the Catholic majority in Ireland and the terrible things done to the Irish and the British almost indifference to the Irish famine. And I think we have to own, and yes, one can feel shame about, I definitely think it's important to say this is wrong, and I do not support this thing done by countries doing. I thought the Iraq invasion was terrible, wrong. And I don't accept. I think feeling shame, I think it's good. Like in one's own life, you do wrong things. You have to confront them. And I think it's a healthy to admit you did something wrong.
It's very interesting because that feeling of nostalgia and that feeling of the great empire, that myth of the great empire, great Soviet empire that existed several years ago and that was lost, that feeling of being humiliated by the loss of the empire has brought us here. And actually what is happening in Russia is the result of that myth of the great empire.
I think it's good to take down these myths, I mean, funnily enough, I thought you might ask questions like this, and you asked about Nazi Germany, and I've done another film I made which had a theme related, was The Reader.
Yeah.
And we were filming in Berlin, and the director Stephen Daldry said, it is remarkable how generations of Germans have acknowledged. So you have that extraordinary Holocaust memorial in the center of Berlin, which is I think, the German nation has said this is a memorial to the people that were murdered by the Nazi, German Nazi government in the 30s and 40s. That's quite a big thing to do. And there's even a place in Berlin where there's a place where they burned all the books, and they've made in the pavement. Do you know that place where you can look down into the little library, a little symbolic? And I would argue that's the country that says we did this and we own it and we remember it. That's a good thing. We acknowledge our guilt, our shame. I think we need, and here in this country we have movements to confront our British involvement with slavery, which is very controversial, but I think it's important that it can go to extremes where everyone is cancelled left, right and centre, which I think is sometimes silly, but I think it's good that we look ourselves our history in the face and say, yes, we did, it was another time, people thought differently, they had prejudices which we would not be acceptable today, but we're vulnerable to prejudice, and the big question: how do we keep the discourse intelligent? How do we keep talking honestly and coherently and admitting? And I think if we're lucky to live in a country where there's an arena of open discourse, that has to be good. Once we close down and suffocate, I think it's people. The spirit can't breathe. People live in people tell lies to themselves. So we need the right people to not enforce the lying.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of prejudice, was there any issue when you were filming The White Crow with Sergei Polunin, who is a brilliant dancer, but at the same time he's known for being an ardent supporter of Russian regime, an ardent fan of Vladimir Putin, has Putin's face has a tattoo on his chest, and I read a lot of criticism towards him, not because of his of the way how he dances, but because of his political position. Was there any issue for you?
At the time we made the film, Sergei had not been so overt in promoting his loyalty to Putin. It came out just after we finished. He had these tattoos, and I have to say my own working relationship with Sergei was very good, and he was extremely to work with, very good, charming, generous, supportive fellow artist. I was disappointed to read of his, supporting of an authoritarian regime like Putin's. I thought I didn't understand. I mean, I can't really comment. I scratch my head and say, what are you thinking? Is it because you need it for your work or to work in Russia? I don't know. I think one has to hesitate to judge people. I mean, I find the Putin regime oppressive, and the more that it seemed to be clamping down on individual expression, oppositional expression, seems unhealthy and wrong. Its cancelling of Memorial seemed to me like, that's exactly what I'm saying. Memorial was in the tradition of, this is what we did, this is what our country did to ourselves. And that's very healthy psychologically to say, here is an archive which says what we did, and we need that. We need to be able to go, maybe there should be in England a museum of the history of the British slave trade. So we could go and we could see what was done, and it was there, and it could be acknowledged. I think we need that. It's important. So what was he talking about?
Yeah, just to follow that that idea that you probably know that Russian propaganda is using all those cases of criticism towards Russian artists who supported Putin, and Russian propaganda says that that's an example of cancel culture, and cancel culture against Russia. And you might have probably heard that President Putin has compared Russia to J.K. Rowling. Yeah. What do you think of that comparison? And is it a cancel culture?
Cancel culture is again part of, it's related to this sort of the righteousness of anger. You are wrong. You are saying this. Therefore, it's against intelligent discourse. When universities do this thing called no platforming, when they invite someone to speak, and the students go, we don't like their views, therefore they can't speak, and they're disinvited. And so I think what's happening, it's a very interesting time, because I think a lot of important things have been put on the table that have not been addressed in relation to gender, sexual behaviour, sexual politics, and history. And there's a great and how we put our we got to put our prejudices on the table and say this is how we behave. And I think there's something of value, of moral value in that. But what happens is it gets simplified, and I think the press is often guilty of massaging, and I think probably social media too, and I'm not on social media, but I get the sense that there's a great noise of opinion, of people reaching for simplistic judgment on other people. And I think that's where I've always distrusted social media and this sort of endless flow of opinion, because discourse becomes, discussion becomes reductive. I mean, in the end, I believe in tolerance and trying to be tolerant of other people and the consideration of other people. We all get trapped in our own world, our own ambition. I know I'm guilty of that, and so we need to help each other be alert to the needs and the viewpoints of other people. And simple human kindness, is the sort of foundation, isn't it, of everyday life? It's just, that's why, why would you want to... The dialogue of hatred is, that's disturbing to me. I mean, J.K. Rowling's views on, she has these feminist views, which I think there's a place for them. I think once she's accused of hating trans people, it seems mad. I don't think she is, but I mean, I can see there's anger against her. But the what I think is disturbing is the language of hatred, the death threats, where you want to go, well, where there must be, can't we all live? It sounds sort of naive, but I think, can't we all just live together? I respect you. You say to me, or this sort of person, I respect that. I mean, sometimes we don't always need to push our. Most of the time I go, I don't know what's right. I just know that. I don't want to be abused or insulted, and therefore I don't want to do it to someone else. I think I think it's, in the end, there's a simple template of behaviour which we can all try to follow, but we're living in a time where opinions are massaged, and again this sort of reductive dialogue into righteousness, and we lose sight of the simple thing of being human, which is kind of a sensitivity to the next person, and that simple thing of, are you okay? Can I help you? If someone falls over, you help them up. If someone's lost on the street, you be the simplest things. A child has fallen over, you go, are you okay? But those simple things, why can't that be? I know it sounds naive, but it's why can't it translate into why? That's why this tribal sense of you are ours and this is ours, and I mean this, and religion plays a part in it, and it's a kind of madness. So we need good politicians who are philosophers and wise people.
Good politicians. Whom do you consider to be good politicians?
Well, I think there are one or two. Perfectly decent men or women working who are just there to serve their communities, whether they're Labour or Conservative, they are. And I think there are lots of ambitious politicians who look to massage the message to be. I think, like anyone else, one gets fed up reading about politics, but the media will always. The corrupt politician is a news story, but the politician who goes on doing their job and quietly talking in our country anyway, I can't talk about Russia, but there are.
I can't talk about Russia either.
but I think there are. I mean, politics are like all of us. There will be people who deliver for the country and for the good of their community, and there are other people who are looking for their own personal gain and advantage, and it's just like any slice of. But I think, if you ask me about the future, I think it's the desperate need to have people of balance, people who can offer a balanced view of things and can help the discourse, by which I mean the discussion whereby we make things better for ourselves, is managed with intelligence and some kind of.
Let me ask you the last question about helping kids. You were saying that it's important to help children, and I know that you are one of the patrons of Gift of Life Foundation, created by Chupan Hamatova. Do you think that there is still going to be an opportunity for the foundation to work, and is there going to be an opportunity to help children in Russia? Even after that crazy war.
There must be. I mean, that's where I'm saying, I'm saying rather naively, and perhaps but I think, there will be. There's that expression, isn't there? This too will pass. I mean, at some point, this war, this terrible time of violence and uncertainty, will finish, and the people who are young today there has to be the support for. I think Chulpan's The Gift of Life is a brilliant charity, and for that to suffer would be terrible. But it's going to be the next 2 or 3 years will be bruising, as people will have to, go through work through their understandable anger against the Russian state. Not against the people, but against the state. But people in the West will have to wrestle with. We're going to have to go through a phase of it, because it's the disgust against what is being perpetrated. But of course, and Chulpan is an extraordinarily courageous woman, and I'm sure that there will be support for Gift of Life. There has to be. We just need the right people to say, make it clear that this isn't part of brand Putin.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
I've given you very long answers.
No. I think that they were profound and very.
I don't know.
Very intellectual, and it's very all the reflections which are, I think, needed those days. And thank you for your support of Ukraine. Thank you for your support of Russian culture and the culture itself.
Well, I think we have to have hope, and I'm very full of admiration for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And keeping the discourse alive and talking to people, and that's of huge importance, I think, what you're doing. So, thank you.
Thank you.